So our next speaker hardly needs an introduction. I have to speak to us next, Erin Cummings, with a talk entitled Still Here, 5 Decades of Surviving Cancer. Many, if not all of you, will already know that Erin was diagnosed with Hodgkin lymphoma when she was only 15 years of age. She has now survived not only that, but numerous other complications of the treatments that she received. And she is the co-founder and chair of Hodgkin's International, and I will not steal any more of her thunder by saying anything else. Please welcome our very own Erin Geddis Cummings.
Hello again. So I'm going to start off with a question, and this is kind of a little bit of a sore subject for some of us, but how many of you have been told that Hodgkin's is a good cancer? Okay, I rest my case. That's it. And when you heard that, did you say to yourself, awesome, yay me, woo, that's the one I wanted, thank you? We know what they are really saying is, you're lucky. You have a cancer that is more curable than others. And yes, that would be true. It was true 50 years ago, and it is true even more today. How ironic is it then that the cure for this good cancer could end up costing us so much? One of the reasons I have never liked the term good cancer is because I think it's a setup for trouble. If you are told that you have a good cancer, you sort of feel like you're supposed to cruise right through it, like it's no big deal. You certainly can't complain. There are worse cancers out there, much worse than yours, so just be grateful you got the good one. And when you finish your treatment, count your lucky stars and get on with your life. I remember being pretty angry after my second relapse of Hodgkin's. I had totally bought in to the good cancer thing, but Hodgkin's just seemed to latch on to me and refuse to go away. I was pissed. What a ripoff, I thought to myself. This is bogus, man. I want my money back. Plus, the treatment itself was so brutal that I could not possibly imagine what good could come out of any of this. I've often wondered if being told that you have a good cancer is problematic for another reason. There is a significant percentage of Hodgkin survivors who suffer from anxiety, depression, and PTSD, higher than what we see in some other cancer survivors. Now, this is certainly not a clinical explanation, but is it possible that one of the reasons for this is that on some level, even a subconscious one, we think we are not allowed to be afraid, not allowed to mourn what has happened to us, not allowed to worry about the future. And when we do have late effects, is it that much harder to accept? The other thing I've heard over the years is, oh, you were so young when you had cancer, that's probably better, huh? I mean, you probably don't even remember half of it. And look, you've had the rest of your life to enjoy. Not so fast there, buddy. I may have been 15, but I remember every single second of it, trust me. And it's not as though it's been smooth sailing ever since. There is no such thing as a good time in one's life to have cancer. There are people in this room who were under 10 years old when they had Hodgkin's. Some were mothers of young children, single dads, college students, young adults who are just beginning a career. There is no time in one's life when having cancer is convenient. It's not as though we can schedule it into our lives. Let's see, I'm going to drop off the kids at school, pick up a few groceries, and then, yeah, I'll have some time around 3 o'clock. I'll have my cancer then. Why don't you just go ahead and schedule me for some Hodgkin's? That'll work. We can't do that. We have it when we have it. We don't have a choice. I can say that the teenage years are not a good time to have cancer. I mean, what is the goal of most teenagers? To fit in, right? to be just like everybody else. Unless you are running for class president, you just want to hover right below the radar line. Figure out who you are, what you want out of life, and try not to be too noticeable until you get your act together. That's a little tough to achieve if you have cancer. I had several strikes against me in staying below the radar. First of all, my father was the high school principal. He was the principal for almost 30 years, and all 7 kids in our family went through that school with Dad at the helm. There were so many of us that no one used our first names. We were just Doc Geddis' kids. It was like a Dr. Seuss movie. There was thing 1 and thing 2, and she was thing 4, and I was thing 2. Everybody knew who we were. Also, by the time I started my high school career, several weeks after everyone else did, I looked like hell. I had lost about 20 pounds. My hair was already falling out just from the radiation to my upper neck. I was constantly nauseous. My skin was a lovely shade of grayish yellow with a lovely tint of green. There was not a tube of CoverGirl foundation that could make me look normal. You would need shellac for that. Perhaps the most difficult thing for me, and it seems silly now, looking back on it, was that I started school later than everyone else did. I had spent the month of August in the hospital undergoing 4 surgeries. All I wanted was to get out in time for the first day of senior high school. I had my opening day outfit all picked out. The snappy skirt and blouse, the coordinating headband, the penny loafers with that shiny new penny that went in the slot. I had my brand new 3-ring notebook, the brown paper bags to cover my new books, a pencil case full of fluorescent markers to draw little smiley faces on those covers. I was good to go, except it didn't happen. I had developed an infection from my laparotomy, and I needed another surgery, so school would have to wait. By the time I limped into my first class, it was painfully obvious that I was not well. Some kids avoided me. The word was out that I had cancer, and in those days, people still thought cancer was contagious. I knew that there were some parents who said to their kids, "Be nice to her, be kind, just don't touch her. You have no idea where that cancer came from." And in all fairness, if anyone asked me how I got Hodgkin's, I would have to say, I don't know. I still don't know. So how could I reassure them that they couldn't have it too? Cancer in those days was still an unspoken word, like Voldemort, he who shall not be named. It was the C word, which is kind of fitting in a way. Sorry, but it's true. We all know it's true. Just can't say the word out loud. When classmates asked me where I had been, I wanted desperately to say, oh gosh, it was a busy summer for me. Tennis lessons, a trip to Europe with the folks, you know, the usual. Instead, I hit them with the truth, which most of them knew anyway. Well, I was hospitalized for a month. They operated on me 4 times. They splayed me open like a fish. They did this insane procedure called a lymphangiogram, and then they cooked me with radiation until I could glow in the dark. And how about that lymphangiogram, huh? How about that for a little piece of torture? Forget waterboarding. If we want to get vital information from our worst enemies, we should just make little slits to the top of their feet, pull out their lymph vessels one by one, insert a needle, and then pump them with dye. They would be coughing up some state secrets pretty damn fast, let me tell you. Re-entry into school life or work life or life in general when you are diagnosed with cancer is always, always difficult. It can be very lonesome. I had just spent the better part of my summer feeling lonely. For days on end, I was placed in a pediatric ward of my local hospital, and it wasn't exactly jumping with activity in the summer. Aside from a few high school football players with pre-season injuries and some toddlers with ear infections, it was empty. It also happened to be the summer of the Munich Olympics, so the only thing on TV was endless newsreels and live videos of terrifying scenes. Men in black masks, high-powered rifles, and Jim McKay saying, "They're gone, they're all gone." Most of my friends were down the shore. That's New Jersey talk for at the beach. That's how we say it. And in an effort to normalize what was happening in our family, my parents kept my siblings pretty busy with activities. I didn't have many visitors. I did have one, however, who made a lasting impression on my life. It was my surgeon, Frank, although I certainly didn't call him that at the time. Frank seemed to be the exception to the commonly held notion that surgeons are stiff, uncaring, and have little use for bedside manners. He was just the opposite. He was charismatic and funny. He would pop his head in during the day to see how I was doing. He could be a bit of a drill sergeant, admonishing me for lying around, telling me to get up and walk, and always when I least felt like it. I don't know how much experience he had with kids with cancer. He seemed relatively young to me, but he was determined that I would get well. He believed in me. He believed that I would make it, and I needed that. I didn't know then that I would need to borrow his confidence, his certainty, many times in the days to come. I had 2 relapses of Hodgkin's in the first year of my diagnosis. More radiation, then another round of radiation, and finally MOP chemotherapy. It was considered a last-ditch effort at that time. Nobody wanted me to do it. But the tumor in my chest had come back with a vengeance, and it was time to pull out the big guns. I have never been so sick in my life. One of the drugs in that cocktail was nitrogen mustard, as in the stuff they used in warfare. It was completely vile. Nitrogen mustard turned projectile vomiting into an Olympic sport. I could hit a distance of 50 feet in about 2 seconds. It was amazing. It was just like a scene out of The Exorcist. I thought my head was going to do a 360. To borrow a line from Jerry Seinfeld, I had come to think that the theory behind treating cancer was figure out what'll kill me and back it off a little. There were times when I was so sick that I just wanted to die. It was hard for me to believe that all this treatment was somehow going to make me well again. I got through it though, and I finished up my rounds of chemo in the fall of my junior year. I was ready to take my high school career by storm. I joined every club that would have me. I twirled a rifle in the color guard, made posters for homecoming, played the cello in the orchestra, and hung out with my friends on the weekends. I squeezed every minute out of every day. I was never sure that my luck would last. And then just when I thought I was safe, my world fell apart. My parents' marriage was suffering badly. Naturally, I thought my illness was the problem. It was my fault. It was too much for them, and it had made them miserable. It was tough on my sisters as well. Cancer had sucked all the oxygen out of the room in our family. I had received an inordinate amount of attention, none of which I wanted, but it didn't matter. It took me years to understand, and a lot of therapy, that my parents' marriage was in trouble long before I got sick. But at that time, I felt I should take the blame. Mom and Dad separated in late September that year, with my mom moving into her mother's home a few blocks away. My sisters and I stayed in the house with my dad. No one talked about it. We all just existed together. It wasn't really living. It was just getting by. A few weeks later, I was hit with one of the most painful moments of my young life. My surgeon, Frank, was killed in an automobile accident. He left a wife who was 9 months pregnant with their first child. My father and I attended Frank's service together. Dad had become a good friend of Frank's. They were both former football players who would occasionally enjoy a game of paddle tennis and a beer. Frank would come to the high school football games and sit on the sideline with the team. He continued to keep an eye on me, and I had just been grateful that he was still in my life, cheering me on and reminding me that I had what it took to survive. I was crushed by his death. It made absolutely no sense to me. It was just one more painful reminder of how unpredictable and unfair life could be. I was learning too many tough lessons in a very short period of time. I couldn't catch my breath. I was drowning. Frank's wife, Sue, delivered their son, a boy she named Christopher, 2 days after she buried her husband. I don't remember how exactly, but somehow I moved through the fog of that horrible time and regained my footing. Maybe it was Frank chastising me for feeling sorry for myself, willing me to keep going, so I did. I was done with Hodgkin's. 5 years later, I was pronounced cured. And in the intervening years, some good things came out of all that misery. Both of my parents found love again. My mother married a wonderful man who I was honored to call my stepfather. In a crazy coincidence, one of his 3 children also had Hodgkin's. He has been a survivor now for over 60 years. My father also remarried. He married Frank's widow, Sue. And that baby boy, Christopher, is my 50-year-old stepbrother. And while he has never met his father, I've been able to say to Chris on more than one occasion, "Your dad saved my life." Pregnant pause. Cancer can bring you to your knees. It can also inspire you to do things you never imagined doing. I was not much of an athlete in school, maybe for obvious reasons. Chemotherapy and school sports don't really work well together. But after I reached my 5-year remission, I started running. I wanted to see what a healthy body could feel like. My cancer experience made me feel as though my body had betrayed me somehow, and I wanted to turn things around. I wanted to be in control for a change. 10 years after finishing my last treatment, I ran my first marathon right here in Boston. I have since completed 8 marathons, 2 in Boston and 6 in New York City, raising funds for pediatric cancer research at the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, where I had some of my treatments back in 1973. I was unprepared for how emotional I would be the first time I did the New York City Marathon. Sloan Kettering happens to be right at the 16-mile mark. The hospital always has a big arch of purple and orange balloons straddling First Ave, honoring all the members of Fred's team, the official running team of Sloan Kettering. Dr. Effinger, by the way, has completed this marathon and run for Fred's team for decades. But this was back in 1998, and I had not been to the hospital in over 25 years. When I spotted those balloons and saw patients cheering us on from the sidewalk, wrapped up in blankets, holding on to their IVs, I completely lost it. I burst into tears, remembering the kid that I was all those years ago. My sister Eileen, who was running with me, had to literally pull me together and get me going again. That story is a fitting metaphor for a lifetime of dealing with late effects. We all know what that means. We are dealt one blow after another, and yet we somehow scrape ourselves off the sidewalk and get going again. We have to. We have to get to the finish line. Except for us, the finish line is constantly moving. I've had my share of late effects, everything from infertility to cardiac failure. I've had an ectopic pregnancy that almost killed me, prophylactic mastectomies, and open heart surgery. I've had multiple subsequent cancers. I've checked off too many boxes, and I have more spare parts than an auto body shop. And yet I am still here, so don't cry for me, Argentina. I'm still here. When I was a kid going through treatment, all I wanted was to meet a grown-up who had had cancer when they were young. I would see people in the waiting rooms at Sloan Kettering who were there one week and not the next. I didn't think they had gone on vacation, but I learned not to ask what had happened. I thought if I could just find one person, just one, who could tell me that it was going to be okay, that they had made it, I would be so happy. I could have hope. And here's the crazy thing. After all that's happened to me, I am the person that I wanted to meet all those years ago. I've been told from time to time that I am brave. I think that anyone who is faced with adversity and still chooses to open their eyes in the morning can claim to be brave. But if courage, optimism, and faith were enough to survive cancer and its aftermath, this room would be overflowing with people right now. Every single Hodgkin survivor in Paul's video had an abundance of those qualities, and then some. The truth is, I've been lucky, pure and simple. That's it. I've been lucky to have a loving family and great friends. I have never had to go it alone. I have had wonderful doctors and access to the best medical care possible. I have always had insurance to pay for that medical care. I have had a husband who has worked his butt off for 47 years to make sure that I had insurance and medical care. I had a good education. I have internet. But what if I had none of those things? What if I were completely alone with zero support, no insurance, no ability to ask for help or to connect with others? What happens then? How can we ask cancer survivors to advocate for themselves, to be strong and resilient, and to have a good attitude if they are struggling just to get by? And how do we reach survivors who have no idea that they are at risk, especially if they are isolated and alone? Who is looking for them? Surviving cancer for 52 years should not be about luck. It should be because we are informed, cared for, supported, and understood. It should be because we are believed when we say, I think there's something wrong with me, and I think it might have something to do for my treatment for Hodgkin's. Let's turn things around. Let's start with us. Let's make sure that what we all have been through is worth something. There may be no such thing as a good cancer, but I believe with all my heart that cancer has brought me a few good things. It brought me my children. Cancer led me to parenthood through adoption, and there is no question in my mind that I was meant to be the mother of my 4 kids. They are my greatest gifts. Cancer brought me a fighting spirit, an ability to appreciate every day, and the willingness to let go of what I can't change. It brought me a community of friends and fellow survivors, all of whom I love and cannot imagine not having in my life. It brought me here today, and I am grateful. After 52 years, I wouldn't change a thing. Thank you.